Picture a man made of iron and regret. His name was Elias Blackwood, and in the year 1878, his whole world was the size of his smithy, a world of fire, soot, and the ringing sound of a hammer hitting steel. It was the only conversation he trusted anymore. His forge was on the edge of a town called Providence, a place that clung to the empty prairie like a man clinging to a ledge. Out there, beyond the last dusty street, was the land of the 7 tribes, a fact that kept everyone in Providence looking over their shoulders. But Elias, he wasn't afraid of what was out there. He was afraid of what was in here, inside his own head, inside the quiet moments when the forge went cold. Grief had built a fortress around his heart. Years ago, there was a woman, Clara. There was a boy, Samuel, his son. A fever took them, fast, merciless. It left a silence so loud that Elias ran right into the noise of the army, hoping the cannons could drown out the memories. The war just gave him more ghosts to carry and a limp in his leg to remind him of it all. Now his life was a simple, brutal rhythm. Wake, light the fire, heat the iron, hammer it, cool it, and do it all over again. The townsfolk saw a grumpy, quiet man with fire in his eyes and a past he refused to talk about. They brought him their broken tools, paid him, and left him alone. They didn't see him pause sometimes, lost in the memory of a tiny hand holding his finger. They didn't understand the fire in the forge was the only warmth he had left. He was a hollow man. Waiting for an end, he was too damn stubborn to find for himself. And then one night, the world outside decided to pay him a visit. A storm rolled in, black and bruised. The wind screamed like a dying animal, tearing at the walls of his smithy. Elias was putting the fire to bed for the night, his face lit by the dying orange glow, when a shape appeared in the doorway, framed by the lightning and the rain. It was not a man from town. He was Cheyenne, tall, exhausted, leaning on the broken shaft of a spear. Rain slicked his black hair to his face, and a dark stain was spreading across his side. Elias's hand went straight for his forging hammer. Every instinct, every lesson from the war, every whispered fear from the town screamed at him. Danger. But the warrior didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked at Elias, and in his eyes Elias saw it. Not a threat, not a plea. He saw a loss so sharp, so familiar, it was like looking in a mirror. The man's gaze flickered from Elias's face down to the broken spear. The steel head was snapped clean off the wooden shaft. Elias could see this wasn't just a broken tool. It was a broken part of this man's soul. It was the same look Elias saw in his own eyes when he caught his reflection in the water trough. His fingers loosened on the hammer. He was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of the ghosts. Tired of being alone. With a sigh that felt like it came from the bottom of his soul, he gave a short nod. A nod toward the dry patch of dirt near the fire. It wasn't an invitation. It was an admission that he understood the language of broken things. The warrior, whose name was Voken, stepped inside. The big loud smithy suddenly felt small, holding 2 lives instead of 1. The air was thick with a tension you could taste. Elias pointed to the wound on Voken's side. Voken nodded, his face a mask of pain. Elias went to his medical chest, a small box with acid, rags, and a needle. He didn't ask. He just knelt and started cleaning the wound. His hands, usually so rough and powerful, were surprisingly gentle. Voken didn't make a sound. He just stared into the embers of the forge as Elias stitched his flesh back together. It was just a job, a piece of broken material to be made whole. When he was done, the silence came back, heavy, uncomfortable. Finally, Voken held out the 2 pieces of the spear. He offered it like a sacred thing. Elias took them. The spearhead was perfectly made, but the steel was different. It had a pattern in it he'd never seen before. The wooden shaft was covered in carvings. Buffalo, eagles, a running wolf, and the figures of a woman and a child. A life story. Elias ran his thumb over the small carving of the child. For a second, a flash of lightning in his mind, he saw his son, Samuel. He looked up, and his eyes met Voken's. The warrior's gaze flickered down to Elias's bad leg, then back up to his face. There was no pity, just understanding. In that one look, they weren't enemies. They were just 2 men, broken by the world in their own ways. Elias turned to the forge. He pumped the bellows and the fire roared back to life. He wasn't just going to fix this spear. He was going to reforge it. He was going to make it stronger than it had ever been before. This was no longer a simple repair job. This was something else entirely. As Elias studied the broken spear, he realized a simple weld wouldn't do. It would be a weak patch on a masterpiece. This spear demanded more. It demanded respect. So he worked. All through the night, with the storm howling outside, he worked. The rhythmic clang of his hammer was a kind of prayer. Heat, hammer, shape. Heat, hammer, shape. It was the only language he was truly fluent in. Vulcan sat on a stool watching, a silent guard. And in his watching, Elias felt something he hadn't felt since Clara died. He felt seen. His craft, the only thing he had left, was being witnessed not as a job, but as a ceremony. The hours passed. The storm raged on. The tension in the little smithy began to melt away, like iron in the heat. Around midnight, Vulcan reached into a pouch and pulled out a piece of dried meat and some hard bread. He held it out to Elias. A simple offering. But in the quiet of that room, it felt like a peace treaty. Elias stopped, wiped his sweaty hands on his apron, and took the food. They ate together in silence. Two men from different worlds, sharing a meal in the heart of a storm. As dawn started to break, Elias finished the work. He had forged a new socket for the spearhead, longer and stronger than the original. He fitted the wooden shaft into it, then wrapped it tight with wet rawhide. As the rawhide dried, it would shrink, binding the steel and wood together so tightly they would never be parted again. It was whole. More than whole. It was stronger. He held it for a moment, feeling its power, then presented it to Vulcan. Vulcan took it. He ran his hands over the new work, testing the balance. A look of deep, honest gratitude spread across his face, breaking through the mask of pain. He reached for another pouch, this one decorated with beads, and held it out. Payment. Elias looked at the pouch. He looked at the spear. This night hadn't been about money. It had been something more. To take payment would be to make it small. He shook his head. No, he said, his voice rusty. No charge. Vulcan stared at him, trying to understand. Then he slowly nodded. He stood up, his body still stiff, but his spirit restored. With one last look, a look that said more than words ever could, he stepped out of the smithy and vanished into the gray morning light. Elias was alone again, but the silence felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. He had fixed a broken thing, and maybe, just maybe, a tiny crack in his own broken soul had started to heal. He had no idea that the real storm was just about to begin. The peace of the morning didn't last. Around noon, a noise started from the town, a low hum of panic that grew into a full-blown alarm. Elias stepped outside. People were in the street, pointing. He followed their gaze, and his blood went cold. Riders, a column of them, coming from the east, 7 of them. They weren't soldiers. They were chiefs, dressed in full war bonnets and beaded shirts. They rode slowly, deliberately, and that was more terrifying than any wild charge. Before he could even think, a mob of townsmen, led by Sheriff Callahan, came running toward his forge. Callahan's face was pale and blotchy. "Blackwood!" he yelled. "We saw him. The whole town saw that Cheyenne leave your place this morning." The men behind him grumbled, their eyes darting between Elias and the approaching chiefs. "What did you do, Blackwood?" the sheriff demanded, his hand on his pistol. "What kind of deal did you make with them? Are you a traitor?" Elias looked at their scared, angry faces. The old walls inside him started to go up. The urge to just be silent, to retreat back into his fortress, was strong. But the memory of the night, of the shared bread, held him back. "I fixed a broken spear," he said, his voice flat. "Fixed his spear?" a man sneered. "You armed him, and now look, they're coming to wipe us out." But the chiefs didn't ride into town. They rode straight to the smithy. They stopped in a perfect line, their horses forming a wall between Elias and the townsmen. The world went silent. Sheriff Callahan and his little mob were frozen, trapped. The chiefs dismounted. They were powerful men, their faces like ancient maps. One of them, an older man with silver in his hair, stepped forward. He looked past the sheriff, his eyes locking onto Elias. "You are the one they call Blackwood," he said. His English was perfect. "I am," Elias replied, his throat dry. "I am the law here." Sheriff Callahan blustered, stepping forward. "You have business. You talk to me." The chief didn't even look at him. "We have not come for the man who wears a tin star," he said, his voice booming. "We have come to speak with the man who works with iron and honor." The townsfolk gasped. This wasn't what they expected. "The warrior who came to you," the chief continued, "his name is Voken. He is a great leader, husband to my daughter. He came to you in need." Elias just nodded. "The spear you mended," the chief, Tashunka, explained, "is the spirit spear of his clan, passed from father to son for generations. Voken broke it, saving our winter camp from a mad bear. He saved many lives, but to a leader, a broken spirit spear is a great shame. He told us what you did. You tended his wound. You worked all night. You made the spear stronger than before. And," the chief's voice dropped, "you refused payment." Elias could feel every eye in Providence on him. "An act of honor for its own sake is a rare thing," Tashunka declared, his voice rising for all to hear. "The men at the army fort would demand 100 horses for such a service. You, a man we thought was our enemy, showed more respect than those who swear friendship. You did not see a Cheyenne. You saw a man with a broken treasure, and you mended it." He finally turned to the stunned sheriff. "We did not ride here for war. We rode here to see the man who understands that a kindness without condition builds a stronger bridge than any treaty." Tashunka gestured. Another chief brought forward a large bundle wrapped in hide. "You have shown our people a great honor, Elias Blackwood, and honor must be met with honor." They unfurled the bundle. It was a magnificent white buffalo robe, a sacred object so rare it was priceless. It was a gift of peace, a symbol of profound respect. The crowd was silent. The world of simple hate they lived in had just been shattered. They saw a traitor. The chief saw a man of peace. Elias reached out and took the robe. It was the heaviest and the lightest thing he had ever held. "Thank you," he whispered. The chiefs left as they came, with a quiet, immense dignity, leaving a stunned town and one blacksmith standing in the doorway that was no longer a prison, but a bridge between two worlds. But as Elias held the sacred robe, a cold dread began to creep up his spine, because he was hiding a secret he had discovered in the dead of night while working on that spear. A secret that told him this story was far from over. You see, when Elias had cleaned Voken's wound, it wasn't a gash from a bear claw. He was a soldier. He knew the difference. It was a clean, round hole, a bullet wound. And when he had pulled the flattened piece of lead from the warrior's side, he recognized it immediately. It was a .44 caliber slug, the exact kind used by the standard issue pistol carried by one man in Providence, Sheriff Callahan. So as Elias worked through the night, a question burned in his mind hotter than the forge. Why would the sheriff of Providence shoot a Cheyenne chief and lie about it? The story of the mad bear was a good one, a noble one, but it was a lie. Voken was covering for someone or hiding from something. Elias had mended the spear, yes, but he had also hidden evidence of a crime. He was an accessory, and now the highest chiefs of the 7 tribes were here, honoring him for an act that was built on a foundation of secrets. He looked at the white buffalo robe, this incredible gift of peace. Was it a thank you, or was it a message, a warning? He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. He had stumbled into the middle of something deep and dangerous. He looked over at the crowd of townsfolk who were now staring at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. He saw Sheriff Callahan in the back, his face no longer angry, but pale with a very specific kind of fear, the fear of a man whose secrets are about to be exposed. Elias realized the chiefs weren't just here to thank him. They were making a statement. They were drawing a line in the sand, right at the door of his smithy, and they had placed him squarely on their side of it. The question was, what side was that exactly? The side of peace, or the side of a war that was about to erupt right here in this dusty little town, all because he fixed a broken spear? The answer came faster than he could have imagined. As the days turned into a week, a strange new reality settled over Providence. The townsfolk treated Elias with a nervous respect. They'd nod at him in the street, their eyes lingering on the smithy where the chiefs had come. But it was the silence from Sheriff Callahan that was the loudest. The man avoided him completely. Elias kept to his routine, the familiar rhythm of the hammer, a comfort in the unnerving quiet. He'd find gifts at his door in the mornings, a basket of berries, a brace of rabbits. Silent offerings from a people he'd never spoken to. The white buffalo robe lay draped in his home, a constant, beautiful reminder of the secret he was keeping. One evening, as dusk settled, a small boy, no older than 10, appeared at his door. He was one of the town children Elias had seen but never known. The boy was holding something out, his hand trembling. It was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. "My pa said you're a friend to the spirits now," the boy whispered, his eyes wide. "He said you fixed the spirit spear." Elias knelt down. "I just fixed what was broken, son." "The spear, it had carvings on it, didn't it?" the boy asked, his voice barely audible. "Of the running wolf and the eagle?" Elias froze. How would you know that?" The boy looked terrified but pushed on. "My pa, he carves things. He saw it before it was broken." A cold knot formed in Elias's stomach. Before it was broken? "Your father saw the spear?" "He was hunting near the old silver mine," the boy whispered, faster now, as if the words were burning his mouth. "He saw the Cheyenne warrior, and he saw Sheriff Callahan. Pa hid. He heard them arguing. Then he heard the gunshot." The world tilted. Elias grabbed the boy's shoulder, maybe a little too hard. "Your father saw the sheriff shoot Voken?" The boy nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "Pa's scared. The sheriff told everyone it was a bear. Pa knows he lied. He said the spear didn't break in a fight. He said the warrior dropped it when he fell into the creek after the shot. So it was true, all of it. The bear was a lie. The shooting was real. But the motive. Why was the sheriff all the way out by the abandoned silver mine, arguing with a Cheyenne chief? What was out there that was worth shooting a man over?" And that's when Elias remembered something else. Something he had pushed to the back of his mind. The carvings on the spear. The buffalo, the eagle, the wolf, and the woman and child. He had assumed they were Voken's family, but as he thought back, the woman's face, the way her hair was carved, it was familiar. It was so achingly, impossibly familiar. He stumbled back into his smithy, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He lit a lantern, his hands shaking. He looked at the few things he had left of his wife, a small book of pressed flowers, a lock of her hair, and a small leather-bound journal filled with her sketches. With a sense of rising dread, he opened the journal. He flipped through the pages of drawings of trees, of birds, of little Samuel's smiling face, and then he found it. A sketch, a detailed sketch of a place deep in the woods, a hidden spring, surrounded by a unique rock formation. Below it, she had written a name, The Quiet Place. He stared at the drawing, his mind refusing to connect the dots. Then he looked closer at the details, the shape of the rocks, the way a particular bent tree leaned over the water, and the small, almost hidden carvings on the rocks themselves. They were identical to the carvings he had seen on Voken's spear. It made no sense. How could his wife, Clara, have known about a place depicted on a sacred Cheyenne spear? She was a woman from the East. She had never spoken of any connection to the tribes. They were supposed to be the enemy, the danger lurking in the wilderness. Unless everything he knew about his own wife was a lie. He felt the floor give way beneath him. The grief he had carried for years suddenly shifted, changing shape into something monstrous and unknown. The fever that took Clara and Samuel, he had always accepted it as a cruel twist of fate, a random sickness. But the doctor at the time, old Doc Abernathy, had been puzzled. He'd said it wasn't like any fever he'd ever seen. A week later, Doc Abernathy had packed up and left town in the middle of the night, never to be seen again. At the time, Elias was too lost in his own sorrow to question it. Now it seemed sinister. The spear wasn't just a weapon, it was a map, a history, and for some reason, His wife's secret place was on it, and the sheriff was willing to shoot a man to keep him away from it. Elias Blackwood, the man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone, was now standing at the heart of a conspiracy that reached back in time and touched everything he had ever loved and lost. He had to know the truth. He looked at the white buffalo robe, then at his hammer. He had mended a piece of steel. Now he had to mend a piece of the past, and he had a horrifying feeling that to do so, he would have to break it wide open first. Elias knew he couldn't confront the sheriff. Not yet. Callahan was a coward, but a dangerous one. He needed more information. He needed to go to the source. He had to find that hidden spring. The quiet place. He waited until the moon was high, then packed a small bag. Water, some of the dried meat Vulcan had left him, and a heavy pistol he hadn't touched since the war. He saddled his horse, moving like a ghost in the darkness. As he rode out of town, he felt the weight of his decision. He was crossing a line, not just the edge of town, but a line in his own life. The man who rode out into the prairie was not the same man who had hidden in his smithy. He followed the creek that flowed past the abandoned silver mine, just as the boy had said. The mine itself was a dark scar on the landscape, a place of bad memories and broken dreams for the town of Providence. The entrance was boarded up, with faded signs warning of danger. But as Elias drew closer, he saw fresh tracks, wagon tracks, heavy ones, and the distinct footprints of several men. Someone had been here recently, and they weren't trying very hard to hide it. He remembered the argument the boy's father had overheard, an argument between Callahan and Vulcan. What could they possibly be arguing about out here? He left his horse tied in a thicket and continued on foot, using the skills the army had beaten into him. He moved silently through the brush, the pistol feeling cold and heavy in his hand. He found the spring about a half-mile upstream from the mine. It was just as Clara had drawn it, hidden, beautiful, and serene. The rocks around it were covered in the same ancient carvings he'd seen on the spear. It felt sacred. He knelt by the water's edge. The moonlight shimmered on its surface. He was about to drink when he noticed something, a faint, unnatural sheen on the water. And a smell. A sharp, metallic smell that reminded him of the acid he used for cleaning metal. He looked closer at the edge of the pool. The plants were withered and brown, their leaves curled and dead. The water itself felt slick, almost oily, to the touch. This place wasn't just quiet. It was dead. The water was poisoned. A twig snapped behind him. Elias spun around, pistol raised, his heart leaping into his throat. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the trees. It was not Sheriff Callahan. It was Vulcan. He was no longer wounded and exhausted. He stood tall, the reforged spirit spear held firmly in his hand. He was not alone. Behind him, emerging silently from the trees, were 6 other warriors. Their faces were grim. "The iron worker seeks the truth," Vulcan said, his voice low and hard. It was not a question. Elias kept his pistol raised, his mind racing. Was this a trap? Had he been led here? "The water is poisoned," Elias said, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "It has been for many moons," Vulcan replied. His eyes were filled with a cold anger. "It flows from the mine, from the white man's greed. It sickens our children. It kills the animals we hunt. This has long been a place of healing for my people. Now it is a place of death." Suddenly it all clicked into place. The sheriff wasn't just guarding an abandoned mine. He was operating it, secretly, illegally, and whatever he was doing in there was leaking poison into the water that fed the creek that flowed through the lands of the 7 tribes, the creek that also fed the well in the center of Providence, the fever, the strange sickness that had taken Clara and Samuel. It wasn't a fever, it was poison. His family hadn't died. They had been murdered. The strength went out of his legs. He staggered back, the pistol lowering in his hand. The grief, the guilt, the years of hollow pain, it all curdled into a white-hot rage that threatened to consume him. He looked at Vulcan, his vision blurring. "My wife, my son," he choked out. Vulcan's hard expression softened, just for a moment. He looked at the carvings on the rocks, then back at Elias. The woman who drew the maps in your book. She was here often, Vulcan said softly. She respected this place. She knew its spirit. She was a friend. A friend? Clara? A friend to the people the town lived in fear of. She knew the water was turning bad, Vulcan continued, his voice heavy with a story he seemed reluctant to tell. She tried to warn them. The man with the tin star. She told him the water from the town well was making people sick. She knew it came from this spring. Elias could barely breathe. What happened? He told her she was imagining things. He told her not to spread panic, Vulcan said, his gaze turning to stone. And 1 week later, she and her boy were dead from a sudden fever. The world went red. Sheriff Callahan hadn't just ignored her warning. He had silenced her. He had let her and his own son die to protect his secret. And he had let the whole town of Providence, his own people, continue to drink the poison water. Elias stood up, the rage giving him a terrible new strength. He was no longer a hollow man. He was a weapon, waiting to be fired. He's still using the mine, Elias said, his voice a low growl. There are fresh tracks. Vulcan nodded grimly. He comes at night, with his dogs. They are there now. Elias looked from Vulcan to the 6 warriors standing with him. They were not a war party. They were an execution squad. And they had come here tonight to end it. He looked down at the pistol in his hand, then at the heavy forging hammer tucked into his belt. He had spent years hammering out his grief on an anvil. Tonight, he would find a new use for it. He had thought his war was over, but he had been wrong. His war had just begun, and the man he was hunting had no idea that he was coming. Let's go pay the sheriff a visit, Elias said, the words tasting like iron and ash. They moved through the woods like shadows, a silent company of ghosts bent on vengeance. Vulcan led the way, his familiarity with the land absolute. Elias followed, his mind a cold, clear engine of fury. Every step brought him closer to the man who had destroyed his world and let him live in the ruins. They stopped at the edge of the clearing that surrounded the mine. A flickering lantern light spilled from the entrance. The silhouettes of 2 men could be seen against the light, their voices carrying on the still night air. Getting too risky, Sheriff, one voice said nervously. That blacksmith, the chief's coming to see him like that. People are talking. And my boy, he's been sick again. Just like... Shut your mouth, Miller, Sheriff Callahan's voice snapped back, sharp and cruel. It's a summer sickness, that's all. We're almost done here. 1 more shipment of silver, and we're gone from this godforsaken town for good. No one will ever know. Miller, the boy's father, the man who had seen the shooting. He wasn't just a witness, he was a partner, forced into it by the sounds of it. But the water, Miller pressed. The water is fine, Callahan roared. Just like it was fine when Blackwood's wife came snooping around with her crazy stories. She learned to keep her mouth shut, and so will you. That was it, the final nail. Elias felt the cold control in his mind snap. He didn't wait for Vulcan's signal. He stepped out of the trees and into the lantern light, the forging hammer held loose in his hand. Callahan, he roared. The sheriff spun around, his face a mask of shock and terror in the flickering light. Miller gasped and stumbled backward. Blackwood, what are you doing out here? Callahan stammered, his hand instinctively going for his gun. You knew, Elias said, his voice a low, deadly growl. He took a slow step forward. Clara warned you. You knew the water was poison. Callahan's eyes widened. He licked his lips, his bravado crumbling. I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. My son Callahan, Elias said, taking another step. The hammer felt like an extension of his arm. You let my boy drink poison water until his body gave out. You and your greed. Callahan finally drew his pistol, his hands shaking. Stay back, Blackwood. I'm the law. Your law murdered my family, Elias spat. Just as Callahan's finger tightened on the trigger, a spear whistled through the air and slammed into the wooden mine support right next to his head. The spirit spear. It quivered there, a symbol of justice delivered. Callahan screamed and fired a wild shot that went wide. In that instant, Vulcan and his warriors emerged from the trees surrounding the clearing. They were silent, implacable, their presence more terrifying than any battle cry. Miller fell to his knees, his hands raised. I'm sorry, Blackwood. He made me. He threatened my family. Callahan, trapped and desperate, made a run for the mine entrance. You'll never take me, he shrieked, disappearing into the darkness. He will poison the tunnels, Vulcan shouted. He has explosives. Elias didn't hesitate. He ran past the terrified Miller, past the quivering spear, and plunged into the black maw of the mine after him. The air was thick with the metallic stench of the poison and damp earth. He could hear Callahan scrambling ahead in the darkness, his panicked breaths echoing off the rock walls. This was his world now, a dark tunnel, a place of soot and stone. He was the blacksmith. This was his forge, and he was here to quench the wicked fire of the man who had taken everything from him. The hunt was on. The tunnel was a labyrinth. Elias could hear Callahan ahead, his boots slipping on the wet rock. The beam from the sheriff's dropped lantern cast wild, dancing shadows, making the chase a disorienting nightmare. You can't hide, Callahan, Elias yelled, his voice bouncing off the walls. You're a dead man, Blackwood, came the panicked reply from the darkness ahead. This whole mine is rigged to blow. Elias pushed forward, his limp forgotten, his body fueled by pure adrenaline. He rounded a corner and saw him. Callahan was at a dead end, frantically trying to light a fuse connected to a stack of dynamite crates. With a roar, Elias threw the forging hammer. It spun end over end, a blur of dark metal, and slammed into Callahan's hand, crushing it against the rock. The sheriff screamed in agony, dropping the matches. Elias was on him in a second, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the damp wall. My wife's name was Clara, he growled, his face inches from the sheriff's. My son's was Samuel. I want you to say their names. Go to hell, Callahan spat, blood and defiance in his eyes. Too late, Elias said, his voice dropping to a whisper. We're already here. He dragged the whimpering sheriff back through the tunnels. When they emerged into the moonlight, Vulcan and his warriors were waiting. Miller was still on his knees, guarded by two of the men. Vulcan looked at Elias, then at the broken man he was dragging. Justice is for the people to decide, Vulcan said. Both are peoples. They marched back to Providence under the cold light of the stars. They didn't use the main road. They walked right into the center of town, with Elias and Vulcan at the head, the disgraced sheriff and his accomplice dragged between them, and the silent Cheyenne warriors as their escort. Lights began to flicker on in windows. People came out onto their porches, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Their confusion turned to shock as they saw the procession. They stopped at the town well, the very well that had been delivering death to their families. Sheriff Callahan has a confession to make. Elias's voice boomed through the silent town. He threw the sheriff to the ground. Tell them about the mine. Tell them about the poison. Under the weight of a dozen glares, from his own people and from the stoic warriors, Callahan's will finally broke. In a pathetic, sobbing voice, he confessed everything. The secret mining operation, the mercury poisoning the water, the threats to Miller. And he confessed the most damning secret of all. He admitted that Clara Blackwood had warned him years ago. He admitted he silenced the doctor. He admitted he knew the fever that was killing people, that had killed Elias's family, was coming from this very well. A wave of horror and rage washed over the townsfolk. They had been betrayed. Their children had been endangered. They had been lied to by the very man sworn to protect them. They looked from the weeping sheriff to Elias, the quiet blacksmith they had misjudged for so long. They saw a man who had borne an unspeakable grief, a grief that they now understood was a murder. And then Chief Tushonka stepped forward. He must have followed, waiting. His presence gave the moment a solemn, official weight. This man's greed has poisoned the land that unites us, Tushonka said, his powerful voice commanding silence. His crimes are not just against his people or mine, but against the earth itself. The justice for such a crime must be shared. What happened next was not swift. It was not a simple act of frontier vengeance. Tushonka decreed that Callahan and Miller would be tasked with cleaning their own poison. Under the joint watch of the townsfolk and the Cheyenne, they would work at the mine, day in and day out, to dismantle the operation and find a way to stop the poison from spreading further. Their prison would be the site of their crime. Their sentence would be to try and heal the wound they had inflicted upon the land. It was a justice Elias had never imagined. Not the quick heat of revenge, but the slow, grinding work of restoration. In the days that followed, the town of Providence was transformed. The old fear was replaced by a shared purpose. Men from the town worked alongside Cheyenne warriors at the mine, guided by their knowledge of the waterways. The bridge of understanding that had been built at Elias's forge was now being built over the Poison Creek. Elias went back to his smithy. He lit the forge, the familiar heat of comfort. He picked up his hammer. Its weight felt different now. It was not just a tool for shaping iron. It was a tool that had delivered justice. A few weeks later, Voken and Tushunka came to his forge one last time. They didn't bring gifts. Tushunka stepped forward and spoke. "Your wife, Clara," he said softly, "was my sister's child. Her mother married a white trader and left our lands before she was born. But the blood of our people was in her. She felt the spirit of the land. That is what drew her to the sacred spring. She was one of us, even if she did not know it." Elias finally understood. The familiarity of the carvings, the impossible connection. Clara hadn't just been a settler's wife. She was the descendant of chiefs. The blood that ran through her veins was the same blood that ran through the veins of the men standing before him. His son Samuel had been one of them too. He hadn't just lost a wife and child. He had lost a connection to a part of the world he never even knew he had. "The white buffalo robe was a gift for your honor," Tushunka said. "But the truth is a gift from her, from Clara. Her spirit guided you to finish the fight she started." Elias Blackwood stood there, in the doorway of his forge, a man no longer defined by his ghosts, but by the family he had just found. The rhythmic clang of his hammer on the anvil would no longer be a sound of loneliness. It was the sound of a heart beating again, a heart of iron forged in fire and grief, now finally beating for a future he never thought he'd have. He had reforged a spear, and in doing so, he had reforged the world. This was a story about how one small act of kindness can unravel a universe of lies. It shows that sometimes the deepest wounds aren't healed by forgetting, but by uncovering the truth, no matter how painful it is. What do you think? Was the justice served to Sheriff Callahan fitting for his crime? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales from the strange, dark, and mysterious corners of history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.